Bradley actually laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not the kind people do when they're trying to soften a sentence before they say something cruel. This was loud, sharp, the kind of laugh a man makes when he thinks the room already belongs to him. It bounced off the dark mahogany walls of courtroom 4B and rolled all the way up to the brass light fixtures hanging over the gallery. A few people shifted in their seats. One woman near the back stopped typing for a second just to look at him. My brother leaned closer to the microphone and adjusted the cuff of his navy silk suit like he was about to close $1 million deal instead of testify under oath. "Your Honor," he said, smiling toward Judge Pendleton, "my sister spent the last 4 years managing loading docks and forklift schedules. She's a workhorse. That's all. She doesn't understand federal logistics compliance." Then he pointed directly at me. "Sarah couldn't run a multi-state supply chain if you handed her the instruction manual." A couple people in the gallery laughed quietly. My mother didn't. She nodded. That part sat heavier than the rest. I kept staring forward at the seal mounted behind the judge's chair. State of Illinois, gold lettering, slight crack running through the wood near the edge, like somebody had bumped it years ago and nobody ever bothered fixing it. My left hand stayed on top of the olive drab canvas binder sitting beside me. The material was worn soft around the edges from age and weather. There was still faded black marker on the inside flap from Kuwait, 2018. Somebody had spilled coffee on the lower corner years ago, and the stain never came out completely. Inside that binder sat 200 pages of audits, routing logs, inventory transfers, barcode scans, timestamp reports, security overrides, fuel invoices, and email chains. Military habits die hard. Across the aisle, Bradley smiled like a man already planning where he was going to dinner after court. His attorney, Marcus Thorne, stood up beside him and straightened his jacket dramatically for absolutely no reason. The guy looked like he practiced arguments in the mirror. Expensive haircut, bright red tie, voice permanently set to cable news volume. "Your Honor," Thorne announced, pacing slowly in front of the jury rail even though this wasn't a jury trial. "This case is unfortunate because it involves family. But the facts are clear. Ms. Jenkins acted outside her authority, manipulated warehouse documentation, and attempted to conceal catastrophic inventory discrepancies after federal auditors began asking questions." He turned toward me with this fake sympathetic expression people use right before they try to bury you alive. She was overwhelmed, underqualified, and frankly embarrassed by her limitations. I heard somebody in the gallery whisper, "Damn." Thorne kept going. Meanwhile, my client built Jenkins Industrial Supply into a respected regional operation with annual revenues exceeding $42 million. That number was funny because payroll had bounced twice in February. But sure, $42 million. Judge Pendleton rubbed the side of his forehead without looking impressed. He'd probably heard 5 versions of the same rich guy speech before lunch. The courtroom clock ticked past 10:47 a.m. I noticed stupid details when I got stressed. Clock sounds, loose threads, coffee stains, exit signs. In Afghanistan, noticing small things kept people alive. In Chicago Civil Court, it mostly kept me from saying something reckless. Bradley folded his hands neatly on the table and looked over at me with that same expression he used to have when we were kids and he broke something expensive before blaming me for it. Except now his watch cost more than my pickup truck. My mother finally looked in my direction from the second row. Eleanor Jenkins, cream-colored blazer, pearl earrings, hair done perfectly at 9 in the morning like cameras might appear at any second. She didn't look angry. That would have been easier. She looked disappointed. Like I'd embarrassed the family by making all this public. The funny part was Bradley had stolen $142,850 from a federal advance account to buy a black Range Rover autobiography with white leather seats. But somehow I was the difficult child for not quietly disappearing under the bus tires. Families are incredible organizations. Judge Pendleton flipped through several papers in front of him before finally looking down at me over his glasses. "Ms. Jenkins," he said calmly, "your brother and his counsel have made serious allegations regarding fraudulent inventory authorization connected to the Grayson Federal Infrastructure contract." I nodded once. The judge glanced toward the binder beside me. "Do you intend to present a defense today?" The room got very quiet after that. Not movie quiet, real quiet, air conditioning humming overhead. Somebody coughing near the hallway, leather chair creaking somewhere behind me. Marcus Thorne smiled confidently and sat back down like the whole thing was already finished. Bradley loosened one cufflink and looked at the ceiling for half a second, bored already. My mother avoided my eyes again. I looked down at my hands. People always notice the rough skin first. Callouses across my palms, old scar near my thumb from a busted cargo latch back in 2019. Another small white line across my wrist from warehouse shrink wrap cutting too deep during winter inventory. Workhorse hands. That was the word Bradley picked. Workhorse, not sister, not veteran, not the person who kept Jenkins Industrial Supply from collapsing 3 separate times while he was busy taking clients to steak dinners he charged to company accounts. Just the workhorse. I slid the canvas binder closer across the table. The brass zipper made a slow scraping sound against the fabric. Then I finally looked directly at the judge. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice came out steady. "I do." The brass zipper was still under my hand when my mind drifted back to the first morning I walked into Jenkins Industrial Supply after leaving active duty. January 11th. 4 years earlier, 4:32 in the morning, Chicago cold that felt personal. The loading dock lights buzzed overhead while freezing wind pushed snow through the gaps near Bay Door 3. Somebody had abandoned a broken pallet jack beside the receiving station weeks earlier, and nobody bothered moving it because the company was already too busy bleeding money to care about appearances. That was the real state of Jenkins Industrial Supply when I came home. Not the polished version Bradley posted on LinkedIn beside motivational quotes and golf photos. The company was drowning. Late vendor payments. Fuel invoices stacking up unopened. Inventory losses nobody could explain. Freight penalties hitting almost $18,000 a month because shipments kept arriving late or routed wrong. One warehouse in Joliet had nearly 30% dead inventory sitting untouched because Bradley kept approving bulk purchases to impress suppliers at trade conferences. He liked expensive handshakes. Problem was, expensive handshakes don't organize warehouses. I didn't come back expecting a parade. Honestly, after 8 years in Army logistics, I mostly wanted quiet, a paycheck, maybe a mattress that didn't smell like military detergent. Bradley offered me a position on the loading dock during a family dinner like he was donating a kidney. "You're good at lifting heavy stuff," he said while cutting into a filet mignon that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill at the time. My mother shot him a quick look. "Bradley." "What?" he laughed. "I'm helping her. Helping me." I'd coordinated supply routes across 3 countries during sandstorms and mortar alerts, but apparently I was now qualified to move boxes in Elk Grove Village for $21 an hour. I took the job anyway, because foreclosure notices don't care about pride. The first week told me everything I needed to know. Drivers waited 40 minutes for outbound paperwork because routing sheets were still printed manually. Inventory counts didn't match physical stock. Half the scanners had outdated firmware. One supervisor named Kenny kept writing shipment corrections on sticky notes and taping them to computer monitors like we were running a lemonade stand instead of a regional supply company. At 4:30 every morning, I started rebuilding the routing system before the office staff arrived. Nobody asked me to. That part mattered. I mapped delivery clusters by fuel efficiency first. Then I reorganized outbound scheduling by load weight instead of alphabetical vendor order, which somehow had been Bradley's actual system. I still don't know how that man survived adulthood. By March, average delivery delays dropped 22%. By June, fuel waste was down enough to save roughly $11,400 a month. I caught an inventory leak involving damaged titanium fittings getting double written into replacement orders. Another $76,000 saved. Nobody held a meeting about it. Nobody even mentioned it. One morning around 5:18 a.m., I was relabeling pallets near Dock 6 when Ultra Salazar from shipping stopped beside me holding a coffee the color of motor oil. "You military?" he asked. I nodded. He pointed toward the new routing board I'd built. "Knew it," he said. "Normal people don't alphabetize emergency freight codes." Then he walked away. That was the closest thing I got to recognition for almost 4 years. Bradley, meanwhile, started showing up to the warehouse twice a month wearing $1,000 coats and talking loudly into Bluetooth headsets while employees scrambled to make the place look functional before he arrived. The timing always amazed me. Every time profits improved, Bradley suddenly became visible. He'd walk through the floor, shaking hands like a senator campaigning through a cornfield. "How we doing, team?" Nobody ever answered honestly because the guy once fired a dispatcher for correcting him in front of a client. One Friday afternoon, He pulled up in a black Mercedes S-Class that still had temporary dealer plates on it. Price tag $118,000. The same week payroll got delayed by 48 hours. That took talent. Sunday dinners at my mother's house became their own strange little theater production after that. Eleanor cooked huge meals every week, like we were trying to solve emotional problems through mashed potatoes, pot roast, green beans, wine glasses nobody was allowed to touch until she finished setting the table exactly right. Bradley always sat at the head like he'd been elected king of Illinois. Then came the speeches. To Bradley, my mother said one night, lifting her glass, "I don't know how you manage the pressure of running such a successful company." Bradley smiled modestly for exactly 2 seconds before accepting the compliment completely. "It's not easy," he sighed. I almost choked on my water. Because earlier that same day, I'd spent 6 straight hours fixing a freight reconciliation disaster caused by Bradley approving duplicate vendor codes after ignoring 3 warning emails from accounting. But sure, heroic leadership. Another Sunday, my mother told her Bridge Club friends that Bradley had single-handedly transformed Jenkins Industrial Supply after Dad passed away. Single-handedly. Meanwhile, I was waking up before sunrise 6 days a week rebuilding their entire operational backbone from the warehouse floor while wearing steel-toe boots with holes near the soles. Nobody noticed. That's not me feeling sorry for myself, it's just true. People usually notice titles before effort, corner offices before competence, expensive watches before useful skills. Bradley understood that instinct better than anybody. He dressed success beautifully. I cleaned up the mess quietly. Around year 3, employees started bringing me problems before they brought them to management. Drivers trusted me. Warehouse crews trusted me. Even vendors started emailing me directly because they knew I'd actually answer. Bradley hated that, not openly. He'd just make little jokes during meetings. "Careful," he'd say. "Sarah's gonna organize us into a dictatorship." Everybody laughed because Bradley signed the checks. I laughed too sometimes. That's the ugly part people don't talk about. You get so used to being underestimated that eventually you start helping people do it. So I kept my head down, kept fixing things, kept eating Sunday dinners while my mother toasted the wrong child every single week. And I kept letting them believe I was only the workhorse. I should have known Bradley was about to do something reckless the moment he started using words like legacy. That was always his warning label. Normal people say things like profit margins or operating costs. Bradley started talking about legacy whenever he wanted attention wrapped in business terminology. The federal contract landed in late September. $2.4 million. Infrastructure supply distribution for 3 municipal water treatment upgrades across northern Illinois. Titanium valves. Reinforced pressure couplings. Industrial filtration assemblies. The kind of contract that could stabilize Jenkins Industrial Supply for the next 5 years if handled correctly, or destroy it completely if handled by my brother. The announcement happened during a Friday staff meeting. Bradley turned into his own personal TED Talk. He stood near the projector screen grinning, while employees clapped politely because they enjoyed paying rent. "This," he said dramatically, "moves us into an entirely different league." Then he pointed toward the company logo behind him like he was unveiling a moon landing. People applauded again. I noticed 3 things immediately. First, Bradley had underbid the contract by almost 12% just to beat competitors. Second, the fulfillment timeline was insane. Third, he hadn't actually secured reliable suppliers yet. That combination usually ends with lawyers getting involved. After the meeting, I caught him near the executive offices. "You don't have enough certified inventory vendors lined up," I told him. Bradley smiled without slowing down. "That's why I have employees. Federal contracts don't work like private commercial orders. You worry too much." "No," I said. "You improvise too much." That irritated him instantly. "You know what your problem is, Sarah?" He snapped quietly. "You still think this place runs like a military warehouse." I looked around at half-broken printers, delayed invoices, and dispatch board held together by sticky notes. Honestly, I wished it did. 3 weeks later, the shortcut started. Cheap overseas substitute parts started appearing in shipments marked as certified domestic inventory. Routing labels got altered manually. Vendor verification forms were suddenly missing. Bradley approved secondary suppliers nobody had ever heard of before. One LLC had an address linked to a strip mall tax office in Nevada. Very reassuring. I started documenting everything immediately. Not because I planned revenge, Because Army logistics teaches you one important thing very fast. When operations go bad, people suddenly develop memory problems. By November, the numbers stopped making sense entirely. Federal advance payments totaling $640,000 had already cleared company accounts, but actual certified inventory coverage barely matched 60% of contractual obligations. Then came the Range Rover, black exterior, white leather interior, custom 23-inch wheels, price tag, $142,850 after taxes and upgrades. Bradley parked it directly in front of the warehouse entrance the Monday before Thanksgiving, like he wanted satellites to see it. Kenny from shipping looked at the SUV and muttered, "Payroll's gonna bounce again." Huh? Smart man. I confronted Bradley that same afternoon inside his office. The place smelled like expensive cologne and poor decisions. "You used Federal's advance money for the Rover?" I asked. He didn't even look embarrassed. "It's called reallocating liquidity." "No," I said. "It's called federal fraud." Bradley leaned back in his chair slowly. "You know what I think," he said. "I think you resent me because Dad trusted me with the company." That one almost made me laugh. Our father trusted Bradley because Bradley looked like leadership in photographs. Tall, confident, loud handshake, expensive haircut. Meanwhile, I looked like somebody who fixed generators during storms. America loves packaging. Then December arrived, and federal auditors finally noticed the discrepancies. Everything changed after that. The first audit request email hit at exactly 8:13 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 9:40, Bradley had screamed at 3 employees. By lunch, Marcus Thorne was in the building. And by 3 p.m., suddenly everybody was acting like I'd become radioactive. Funny how fast fear spreads through offices. Bradley stopped speaking to me directly after that. Instead, I started receiving weirdly formal internal emails documenting warehouse authorizations I never approved. Then I noticed altered timestamps. Then forged initials. Then memos appeared claiming I'd independently authorized vendor substitutions during temporary executive review delays. The language sounded like Bradley trying to cosplay a compliance officer. Badly. One memo even claimed I approved rerouting inventory on October 14th, while I was physically clocked into Dock 2, handling inbound freight with 6 witnesses. That's the problem with rich people who lie too often. Eventually, they assume everybody else is stupid. The real panic started when federal investigators requested server access logs, because digital systems don't care about family loyalty. I remember sitting alone in the warehouse break room around 11:26 p.m. staring at one particular email Bradley accidentally copied me on. Subject line, exposure containment strategy, very subtle. Marcus Thorne had written, "Position operational responsibility downward before formal inquiry expands." Downward. That meant me, the workhorse. I drove home that night through freezing rain with both hands tight on the steering wheel the entire way. My apartment was small. 1 bedroom, cheap carpeting, radiator heat that sounded like an old man fighting for survival every winter. Still felt more honest than my family's dining room. I had just microwaved leftover chili when somebody knocked on my door. 3 soft knocks. I already knew it was my mother before I opened it. Eleanor stood in the hallway wearing a camel-colored wool coat with mascara slightly smeared beneath one eye. She looked exhausted. Older somehow, but not because she was worried about me. That became obvious pretty fast. The second she stepped inside, she grabbed my hands. "Sarah," she whispered, already crying. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." I stared at her. Harder for who? She looked away first. That answer told me everything. My mother sat on the edge of my couch, twisting tissues between her fingers while explaining how stressed Bradley was, how the company could collapse, how federal charges would ruin the family name. Then she finally said the part she came for. "Bradley has children," she said softly. "A reputation. People depend on him." I waited. Nothing else came. "No, you don't deserve this. No, I know you're innocent. Just Bradley's reputation." I think that was the exact moment something inside me went completely still. Not angry. Worse. Clear. My mother started crying harder when I didn't answer immediately. "Sarah, please." I looked around my apartment for a second. Army duffel bag near the closet. Work boots by the heater. Half-finished coffee on the counter. Quiet little life. Nothing flashy, nothing impressive. But every single thing in that apartment belonged to me honestly. I pulled my hands away gently. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "So I'm supposed to go to prison for him?" My mother's tissue was still sitting on the coffee table after she left. Small thing, crumpled. Damp mascara stain on one corner. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds after the apartment door closed behind her. Then I walked over, picked it up, and threw it into the trash beside the kitchen counter. That was it. No dramatic breakdown, no screaming, no throwing plates against the wall like people do in streaming shows written by 26-year-olds who've never paid a mortgage. Just silence. The radiator hissed behind me while sleet tapped softly against the apartment windows. Somewhere downstairs, my neighbor's dog barked twice at nothing. I stood there in my socks for another minute thinking about the phrase she used. Bradley has a reputation to protect. Not truth, not fairness, reputation. My mother had spent my entire life treating integrity like optional paperwork as long as appearances stayed polished. When Dad was alive, he used to joke that Eleanor would straighten paintings during earthquakes. I finally understood what he meant. I walked into the kitchen and started a pot of black coffee. No sugar, no cream, military habit. At 10:14 p.m., I opened my laptop. That sound alone changed something in me, not emotionally, operationally. There's a switch your brain develops after years in logistics work. Once it flips, panic disappears and sequencing takes over. Priorities, documentation, verification, redundancy. People think discipline means being tough. Usually, it just means staying organized while everybody else loses their mind. I opened 3 separate backup drives first: personal archives, independent inventory exports, email mirrors I'd been quietly storing since my second year at Jenkins Industrial Supply. Not because I distrusted everybody back then. Just because experience taught me companies forget things whenever lawsuits appear. By midnight, I already had enough material to scare a corporate accountant into early retirement. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. Barcode scans manually overridden at impossible hours. Supplier certifications altered after submission. Inventory reconciliation reports disappearing from internal servers while copies still existed in outbound email caches. Bradley wasn't just reckless. He was sloppy. That's the danger with arrogant people. Eventually, they confuse confidence with competence. At 11:42 p.m., I found one of my old warning emails. Subject: vendor verification failure, immediate action required. I'd sent it directly to Bradley and copied accounting. The attached report clearly showed 3 uncertified valve batches flagged for federal noncompliance before shipment authorization. Bradley replied 12 minutes later. Proceed anyway. We'll address paperwork discrepancies internally. I stared at that sentence for a long time, not because it shocked me, because I realized he genuinely believed nobody would ever challenge him. The next morning, I called off work for the first time in almost 3 years. Kenny from shipping nearly had a heart attack. You sick? He asked over the phone. Something like that. You dying? Not today. He laughed nervously. That man always sensed disasters before management did. For the next 3 weeks, my apartment turned into a war room. Stacks of paper covered my dining table. Timestamp reports spread across the couch cushions. Routing manifests lined the floor beside the television stand. I slept maybe 4 hours a night surrounded by printer ink and federal compliance documentation. Honestly, I've had worse living conditions. At 4:30 every morning, I brewed coffee and kept building the timeline. October 14th, security override logs. October 22nd, altered inventory reconciliation entries. November 3rd, federal advance transfer discrepancies. November 19th, unauthorized rerouting through shell vendors. Every piece connected cleanly once organized chronologically. That's the thing about data. People lie beautifully. Numbers usually don't. Around day 6, Bradley started calling repeatedly. I never answered. Voicemails piled up anyway. At first he sounded annoyed, then frustrated, then aggressive. Sarah, this has gone far enough. Call me back immediately. You're misunderstanding what's happening. My personal favorite came around 1 at 8 a.m. after he'd apparently been drinking expensive whiskey and bad decisions. You think you're smarter than everybody because you alphabetize boxes. That one actually made me laugh. Short laugh. Still counted. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne started emailing formal legal notices demanding preservation of relevant company materials, which was attorney language for we know you have evidence and it's making us nervous. Good. One night around 2:17 a.m., I found a buried security access log Bradley forgot existed. That was the moment I knew he was finished. The system showed his executive credentials manually overriding shipment verification protocols tied directly to the federal contract inventory. Exact timestamps, exact terminal location, exact IP address. There it was. Digital fingerprints wearing a silk tie. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen while cold coffee sat untouched beside me. No anger anymore, just certainty. Outside, snowplows scraped slowly down the street beneath my apartment window. Chicago looked gray and exhausted under the streetlights. For the first time in weeks, I thought about my father, not emotionally, more like inventory review. Dad used to say something during hunting trips when Bradley lied about stupid things as a teenager. Character shows up when pressure gets expensive. At the time, I thought he meant courage. Turns out he meant accountability. By the second week, I started printing everything physically. 2 copies minimum, 1 master set, 1 redundancy archive. Military habits again. The printer in my apartment overheated twice during a 73-page export batch. I had to point a box fan at it like a NASCAR pit crew handling office equipment. Very glamorous life. Every document went into categorized sections. Vendor fraud, inventory overrides, financial transfers, internal warnings, server authentication logs, no emotional notes, no revenge speeches, just evidence. Clean, structured, fatal. On the final night, I pulled the old olive drab deployment binder from the back of my closet. Canvas exterior, brass rings, sand-colored stitching near the spine, still smelled faintly like dust and machine oil. I sat at the kitchen table, carefully inserting all 200 pages into the binder 1 section at a time. Every divider labeled, every report indexed, every timestamp cross-referenced, an impenetrable fortress built entirely from receipts. Around 3:41 a.m., I closed the binder and rested both hands on top of it. Heavy, solid, honest. Then I finally allowed myself one quiet thought I'd been avoiding for weeks. My family never believed I would fight back, because workhorses aren't supposed to bite. The binder felt heavier once I brought it into court. Not physically, mentally. Funny how paper can weigh more when people are trying to bury you with lies. Marcus Thorne had been talking for almost 40 minutes straight by the time Judge Pendleton finally glanced at the wall clock again. The man treated silence like a personal enemy. Every time the courtroom got quiet for more than 3 seconds, he filled it with another dramatic sentence. He paced slowly across the polished floor in front of the judge's bench, while holding a legal pad he barely looked at. "Your Honor," he said loudly, "this is a deeply unfortunate case of workplace resentment escalating into operational sabotage." Sabotage, that was the word of the hour. Thorns stopped walking long enough to point toward me without actually turning fully in my direction. Probably learned that move in lawyer school. Ms. Jenkins spent years watching her older brother succeed professionally while she remained stuck in lower-level warehouse operations. Lower level. Interesting phrase from a man billing $900 an hour to defend fraud. He kept going. She had unrestricted access to inventory systems. She handled physical shipments personally, and according to multiple internal memoranda, she exercised unauthorized decision-making beyond her assigned role. Unauthorized. That one almost made me smile. Because every unauthorized decision he referenced had saved the company money, Bradley later bragged about publicly. The courtroom air felt stale after a while. Dry heat, old wood polish. Somebody near the gallery kept unwrapping cough drops as quietly as humanly possible. The clock on the wall ticked past 11:26 a.m. I kept watching it between statements because looking at Thorne too long gave me the same headache as airport security announcements. Across the aisle, Bradley sat comfortably beside him with both hands folded on the defense table, like he was attending a charity luncheon instead of a civil fraud hearing. Calm. Too calm. That told me he still believed appearances mattered more than facts. He wore a charcoal suit this time. Tailored perfectly. Silver watch. Fresh haircut. Probably spent more preparing his image for court than preparing actual evidence. And honestly, for most of his life, that strategy worked. People trust confidence first. Verification comes later. My mother sat in the second row wearing the same cream-colored blazer from earlier. She still hadn't looked directly at me once all morning. Not one time. That part surprised me more than the accusations, because avoiding eye contact takes effort. You have to actively choose it. Judge Pendleton adjusted his glasses while Thorne launched into another speech about corporate hierarchy confusion and employee overreach. At one point, Thorne actually said, "Mrs. Jenkins likely misunderstood the complexity of executive-level procurement operations, likely misunderstood. I spent 8 years coordinating military logistics under mortar threat. Bradley once accidentally ordered $6,000 worth of incorrect office chairs because he clicked the wrong supplier code during a golf trip. But sure, I was the confused one. The gallery shifted occasionally whenever Thorne raised his voice for dramatic effect. A younger associate sitting behind him nodded constantly, like one of those dashboard dogs people used to keep in old sedans. The entire performance felt rehearsed, because it was. Thorne wasn't trying to prove Bradley innocent. He was trying to make me look small enough that nobody asked harder questions. And for a while, it almost worked. That's the uncomfortable truth. I could feel the assumptions sitting in the room. Faded, gray sweater, warehoused, manager. Across from CEO, tailored suit, corporate attorney. America has already picked a winner before evidence enters the building half the time. A woman near the back glanced toward me briefly, then back toward Bradley while Thorne described his extraordinary leadership under pressure. I almost wanted to ask if she also believed the Range Rover bought itself accidentally. Instead, I stayed quiet. Because silence makes arrogant people overconfident, and overconfident people talk too much. Thorne eventually lowered his voice into that fake, compassionate tone attorneys use when they want judges to feel emotionally manipulated but intellectually superior. Your Honor, he sighed dramatically. My client showed loyalty to his sister for years, despite ongoing operational concerns regarding her judgment. Operational concerns? That one was new. Bradley nodded solemnly beside him like they were discussing a tragic medical diagnosis instead of fictional warehouse conspiracies. Then Thorne delivered the line he clearly practiced beforehand. Frankly, Miss Jenkins was never equipped to handle the responsibilities she attempted to assume. A few quiet murmurs moved through the room. I looked down at my hands again. Still rough, still scarred, still steady. That mattered. Because underneath all the courtroom noise, underneath Bradley's performance and Thorne's expensive vocabulary, and my mother pretending I didn't exist, there was one thing nobody else in that room understood yet. I already knew exactly what happened. Certainty changes your heartbeat. I could feel anxiety sitting low in my stomach anyway, though. Tight, cold. Human. Anybody who tells you courage means not being afraid has never testified in court while their own family tries to hand them to federal investigators. My throat felt dry. The binder beside me looked suddenly enormous sitting on the table. 200 pages, 4 years of receipts. Every lie Bradley told was sitting 6 inches from my elbow. And still, for one brief second, I wondered if maybe I should walked away before any of this reached court. Not because Bradley deserved protection, because exposure changes people permanently. Once truth becomes public, families don't really recover. They just rearrange their denial into quieter shapes. Marcus Thorne finally stopped pacing and returned to the defense table with a satisfied expression. He genuinely believed he'd controlled the room. Then Judge Pendleton leaned back slightly in his chair and looked toward me. Not Bradley. Me. Miss Jenkins, he said calmly. You may approach the stand. My heartbeat slowed instantly. Training does that sometimes. Your body stops negotiating and starts functioning. I stood up carefully from the table. The courtroom suddenly felt very still again. Bradley glanced over confidently at first. Then his eyes dropped toward the olive drab binder in my hand, and for the first time all day, his expression changed a little, just a little. I picked up the binder and stepped away from the table. The brass rings inside shifted softly under the canvas. One step, then another. Steady pace, straight posture, controlled breathing. The same way soldiers walk toward dangerous places after realizing fear won't cancel the mission. Nobody spoke while I crossed the courtroom floor. Not even Marcus Thorne. Good, let them listen now. The court clerk held out the Bible while I kept one hand on the binder against my hip. Do you swear the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. That surprised me a little. I sat down in the witness chair and placed the canvas binder carefully on the small wooden ledge in front of me. The brass rings inside shifted softly again. Marcus Thorne stood immediately. Of course he did. The man reacted to silence the way smoke alarms react to burnt toast. He walked toward the witness stand with a tight smile and, both hands clasped theatrically behind his back. Ms. Jenkins, he began smoothly, you've described yourself repeatedly as a warehouse operations employee, correct? Yes. And you never held an executive procurement title? No. Interesting. That word again. Lawyers love interesting, because it sounds smarter than what they're actually thinking. Thorne turned slightly toward the judge. So despite lacking executive authority, formal financial oversight, or federal contracting certification, You somehow expect this court to believe you fully understood the procurement structure tied to a multi-million-dollar infrastructure agreement? He looked pleased with himself after that sentence. Probably practiced it in the mirror, too. I glanced once at Judge Pendleton. The judge looked tired already. Honestly, same. Yes, I answered. Thorne smiled thinly. And how exactly would a loading dock manager acquire such advanced understanding? I rested my hand on the binder. By fixing mistakes made by people who ignored warnings. A couple heads lifted in the gallery. Bradley shifted slightly at the defense table. Tiny movement. Still counted. Thorne immediately stepped closer. Let's discuss these so-called warnings then. There it was. Permission. I unzipped the binder slowly and opened it on the witness stand. The brass ring snapped apart with a sharp metallic click that cut through the courtroom, so suddenly even the court reporter glanced up. Good. Now everybody was awake. I flipped carefully through the index tabs until I reached Section C, Vendor Override Authorization Logs. Every page perfectly aligned, every timestamp highlighted, every attachment numbered. Military habits. Thorne folded his arms confidently. Mims. Jenkins, he said, voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps you can explain why inventory connected to the Grayson contract disappeared under your direct warehouse supervision. I didn't answer immediately. Didn't argue either. I simply turned to page 47. Then I read. On October 14th at 6:14 a.m., Bradley Jenkins manually overrode Security Routing Protocol Delta 7 to reroute 400 titanium pressure valves to Black Pine Logistics LLC. The room went still instantly, I continued. Authorization occurred from terminal IP address 1044.18.223 using executive credential key BJ4471. Marcus Thorne stopped moving, literally froze mid-step. I heard somebody in the gallery whisper, "Oh, damn." Bradley sat up straighter beside the defense table. His expression changed slowly this time, not panic yet, but the confidence cracked. Thorne recovered quickly enough to speak again. And where exactly did you acquire this information? I slid page 47 slightly forward. Company server backup archives cross-reference against outbound routing authentication logs. Thorne blinked twice. That answer apparently wasn't in his prepared script. I turned another page. Page 52 contains confirmation that Black Pine Logistics LLC was not federally registered for certified infrastructure, material handling at the time of transfer. Another page. Page 61 documents secondary rerouting instructions issued 3 hours later after inventory discrepancies triggered internal compliance flags. Another. Page 63 includes accounting records showing federal inventory reconciliation mismatches exceeding $218,000 by October 21st. The courtroom air felt different now. Heavier before, sharper now. Like everybody suddenly realized the quiet warehouse woman wasn't guessing. Marcus Thorne stepped closer again, but the aggression was gone from his posture. He looked less like a predator now, and more like a guy trying to remember where he parked during a fire evacuation. You're presenting technical material without verified context, he snapped. No, I replied calmly. I'm presenting timestamps. That one landed. Judge Pendleton held out his hand. Bring me the binder. I stood carefully and carried it toward the bench while Bradley watched me the entire time. His jaw tightened slightly once he realized the judge was actually reading it. Not skimming, reading. Pendleton adjusted his glasses lower and flipped through several pages in silence. The only sound in the courtroom was paper turning. Then he stopped. Counselor, the judge said slowly toward Thorne. Page 79 appears to contain an email from your client instructing Ms. Jenkins to proceed with inventory substitutions despite federal compliance concerns. Marcus Thorne walked toward the bench immediately. Your Honor, we object to isolated communications lacking operational context. Judge Pendleton cut him off without raising his voice. The timestamps is attached. Silence. The judge kept reading. I stayed standing beside the witness box with both hands relaxed at my sides. Funny thing about preparation, once you know your evidence is solid, you stop needing performance. Bradley suddenly stood up halfway from his chair. This is ridiculous, he snapped loudly. She's pulling military jargon out of server trash files to confuse the court. There it was. Panic. Judge Pendleton looked up sharply. Sit down, Mr. Jenkins. Bradley hesitated too long before sitting. Bad decision, you never hesitate with judges. Meanwhile, I opened another section inside the binder. Financial transfers. I turned to page 112. On November 3rd, I said calmly, $142,850 was transferred from Federal Advance Allocation Account 8841G directly into a vehicle acquisition payment through Lakeshore Premier Imports. Bradley's face lost color immediately. The gallery started murmuring again. I continued before anybody interrupted. The transfer occurred at 2:08 p.m. 47 minutes later, Mr. Jenkins activated insurance coverage for a 2023 Range Rover autobiography. I looked directly at Bradley for the first time all day. White leather interior, I added. That one hurt him more than the dollar amount. Because details make lies suffocate. Marcus Thorne tried again. Your Honor, this witness clearly accessed confidential executive financial records without her authorization. I accessed backups, I interrupted calmly. Because somebody kept deleting the originals. Dead silence. Complete silence. Even my mother finally looked at me. And for the first time since this hearing started, Bradley looked exactly like what he really was underneath the tailored suit and executive title. Not a genius. Not a leader. Just a frightened man realizing the Workhorse kept receipts. Bradley slammed both hands against the defense table, so suddenly the water pitcher beside Marcus Thorne rattled. This is complete nonsense. There it was. The executive mask finally cracked all the way down the middle. His face had gone bright red now, not the controlled irritation he'd been performing earlier. Real panic looks uglier in person. Sweat near the hairline, jaw too tight, voice climbing half an octave without permission. Bradley pointed directly at me again. She's making this sound complicated on purpose, he shouted. This military garbage is designed to confuse people. Military garbage. Interesting choice of words from a man currently drowning in time-stamped evidence. Judge Pendleton didn't react immediately. Honestly, that made it worse. Calm judges are dangerous judges. The courtroom had gone completely silent, except for Bradley breathing too hard beside the defense table. Even Marcus Thorne looked uncomfortable now. The man had finally realized he wasn't managing a difficult hearing anymore. He was standing next to an active collapse. Judge Pendleton slowly removed his glasses, cleaned them once with a folded cloth, then looked directly at Bradley. He said quietly, "Sit down and remain silent unless addressed." Bradley opened his mouth again anyway. Huge mistake. She manipulated archived systems. Sit down. That second one hit harder. Bradley dropped back into his chair so aggressively the wheels rolled backward several inches. Nobody moved after that. The judge extended his hand toward me again. "The binder, please." I carried it to the bench carefully while every set of eyes in the courtroom followed the movement like the folder itself might explode. Judge Pendleton opened the canvas cover and started reading page by page. Not skimming, not pretending, actually reading. That changed everything. Because people can survive accusations, documents are harder. The courtroom clock ticked past 12:18 p.m. while the judge worked silently through section tabs. Vendor logs, financial transfers, compliance warnings, authentication records. Bradley kept shifting in his seat every few seconds now. The confidence was gone completely. Good tailoring can hide a weak chin. It cannot hide fear. Marcus Thorne attempted one final recovery. "Your Honor," he began carefully, "these records require independent forensic validation before establishing." Judge Pendleton lifted one finger without looking up. Thorne stopped talking immediately. That was probably the smartest decision he made all day. The judge turned another page, then another. Then he paused, long pause. I recognized the divider instantly from where I stood beside the witness stand. Section H, Internal Executive Communications, page 187. Bradley saw it too. And for the first time since I'd known him my entire life, I watched my brother genuinely lose control of his own expression. His eyes widened first, then his shoulders tightened. Then all the color drained from his face at once, like somebody pulled a plug somewhere behind his ribs. Judge Pendleton adjusted his glasses lower and read silently for several seconds before speaking aloud. Dated November 22nd, 11:43 p.m., he said. The courtroom somehow became even quieter. The judge continued reading directly from the email. "Sarah, move the reimbursement allocation temporarily and stop flagging personal withdrawals through compliance. I already told you I'll cover the balance after quarter close." Bradley stared at the floor. The judge kept reading. "Also, ignore accounting's questions about the Lakeshore payment. I'm handling personal debt issues privately and don't need warehouse staff creating confusion." Nobody breathed. Seriously. You could feel an entire room stop functioning at once. Even Marcus Thorne looked physically ill now. Judge Pendleton lowered the page slightly. Attached below, he continued calmly, is a transfer authorization connected to a vehicle purchase totaling $142,850. He looked directly at Bradley over the top of the document. Using federal contract allocation funds. Bradley finally snapped again. That email isn't complete, he barked. There's missing context. Judge Pendleton didn't even blink. What context would improve this sentence, Mr. Jenkins? No answer. The judge read another line aloud. Quote, nobody checks warehouse-level compliance details anyway. End quote. A couple people in the gallery exchanged looks immediately. One older man actually muttered, Jesus Christ. Honestly, fair reaction. Marcus Thorne stood halfway. Your Honor, my client was under enormous financial pressure during this period. The judge cut him off sharply this time. Your client appears to have committed fraud while attempting to frame an employee who repeatedly documented objections. Thorne sat back down, quietly. Very different energy from 40 minutes earlier. Judge Pendleton closed the binder slowly and rested both hands on top of it for a moment. Then he looked at me, not with sympathy exactly. Respect. Subtle difference. He turned back toward Bradley afterward. I've reviewed enough material here to establish a deeply troubling pattern. Bradley swallowed hard but said nothing. The judge's voice stayed calm. Your sister documented compliance concerns repeatedly. Another page turned. She preserved operational backups after records began disappearing. Another page. She warned executive leadership multiple times regarding federal contract violations. Another, and according to these logs, she continued correcting inventory discrepancies that likely prevented federal investigators from discovering these activities years earlier. Judge Pendleton finally leaned back slightly in his chair. Then he delivered the sentence that ended my brother's performance forever. The only thing this workhorse appears guilty of, he said coldly, is keeping a criminal out of prison for 4 years. The words landed like concrete. Bradley looked completely stunned, not angry anymore. Just exposed. That's different. Anger still believes it can win. Exposure understands the room has already changed sides. Across the gallery, my mother pressed both hands over her mouth while tears filled her eyes. And for once, nobody in that courtroom looked at Bradley Jenkins like a successful CEO. They looked at him like what he actually was, a man who spent years mistaking silence for weakness. The judge closed the binder carefully. Meanwhile, I stood beside the witness stand, feeling something I honestly didn't expect after all this time. Not triumph, not revenge. Relief. Because the truth finally belonged to the room now, not just me. Judge Pendleton's gavel hit once. Sharp sound, clean sound. The kind that tells everybody pretending time is officially over. This court is referring all related financial documentation to federal investigators effective immediately, the judge stated. Ms. Jenkins is cleared of all allegations tied to fraudulent procurement activity. Nobody moved at first. Not really. Courtrooms get strange after moments like that. People stop acting natural because everybody suddenly becomes aware they just watched somebody's life split in half publicly. Marcus Thorne stared down at his legal pad without turning pages anymore. Bradley sat frozen beside him, still breathing, still upright, but finished. You could actually see the moment his mind started calculating consequences instead of excuses. Federal investigators, bank records, server logs, transfer authorizations. No expensive suit on earth fixes those problems. The courtroom clerk started gathering paperwork while quiet conversations slowly returned around the gallery. Chairs shifted. Pens clicked. Somebody whispered near the hallway doors. Life moving forward again. That part always feels weird after disasters. I stood beside the witness stand for another second before reaching for the binder, still heavy, still honest. Bradley finally looked at me again while I slid the documents back inside the canvas cover. Not angry this time, desperate. Huge difference. Sarah, he said quietly. First time all day, he'd used my name without sounding condescending. I looked at him calmly. He swallowed once before speaking again. You really did this? That question almost made me laugh. Like the fraud happened accidentally and I'd somehow ruined family movie night by noticing. I zipped the binder shut slowly. No, I answered. You did. He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out this time. Good. Because honestly, I was tired. Not dramatic tired. Bone tired. The kind that settles behind your eyes after carrying something too heavy for too long. I stepped away from the witness stand while Bradley remained seated at the defense table staring blankly ahead. Marcus Thorne leaned toward him, whispering urgently, Now, probably discussing damage control and criminal defense referrals. Very expensive conversation. My mother stood abruptly from the second row once she realized I was leaving. Sarah. Her voice cracked immediately. I paused near the courtroom doors but didn't turn around yet. Court security officers were already approaching Bradley's side of the room alongside two men in dark federal jackets who definitely hadn't been there earlier. Interesting timing. One of them opened a notebook while speaking quietly to Marcus Thorne. Bradley noticed them too, and suddenly the confident CEO looked exactly like every frightened middle-aged man who realizes laws apply to him after all. I pushed open the courtroom doors and stepped into the marble hallway outside. Cold air drifted through the building from somewhere near the entrance lobby. Reporters hadn't arrived yet, just attorneys walking quickly between courtrooms, carrying folders and caffeine addictions. My boots echoed softly against the polished floor. Then I heard my mother hurrying behind me. Sarah, wait. I stopped near one of the tall courthouse windows overlooking LaSalle Street. Gray winter sky outside. Traffic crawling below. Chicago looking exhausted as usual. My mother approached carefully like I might physically break apart if she moved too fast. Her hands trembled slightly. Mascara streaked faintly beneath her eyes now. For a second, she looked older than 61. Not because of age, because denial finally costs something once reality sends invoices. Sarah, she whispered. I waited quietly. She tried speaking twice before words actually came out. I didn't know it was that bad. That sentence hung there between us. Not an apology. Not really. Just another version of. I looked away because it was easier. My mother reached toward my arm but stopped halfway. You have to understand, she said softly, crying again now. Bradley was under so much pressure after your father died. I was trying to keep this family together. There it was. The real confession. Not love, maintenance. She'd spent years protecting the shape of the family instead of the people inside it. And standing there in that courthouse hallway, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. Honestly, I think anger requires hope underneath it somewhere. Hope the other person might finally understand what they did. That hope was gone now. And weirdly enough, so was the pain attached to it. I looked at my mother carefully, pearl earrings, perfect coat, trembling hands. Same woman who taught me to write thank you cards. Same woman who packed cookies into care packages during my deployments. Same woman who asked me to go to prison so her favorite child could keep driving a luxury SUV. Human beings are complicated like that. Good memories don't erase betrayal. Betrayal doesn't erase good memories either. That's the uncomfortable part nobody likes discussing. My mother finally whispered the words she should have said weeks ago. I'm sorry, I believed she meant it. Too late still counts as sincere sometimes, but late is late. I adjusted the strap on the canvas binder resting against my side. Then I zipped up my faded olive jacket slowly, while looking out through the courthouse window one last time. Snow had started falling lightly over downtown Chicago. Small flakes, quiet ones. My mother wiped her face quickly. Can we talk later, she asked. I thought about it for maybe 2 seconds. Then I gave the only honest answer I had left. I don't know. Not cruel, not forgiving either. Just true. I started walking toward the courthouse exit after that. Steady pace, straight posture, binder under one arm. The same workhorse they underestimated for years. Only now I finally understood something they never did. Human dignity isn't built from titles, or money, or family approval. It's built from knowing exactly what your silence costs, and refusing to rent it out to people who only love you when you're carrying their weight. I pushed through the front doors and stepped into the falling snow. Then I kept walking. I never looked back. 2 days after the trial, I found myself sitting alone inside a diner near Union Station drinking coffee that tasted like somebody filtered it through drywall. Honestly, it felt comforting. The waitress called everybody hon. The booths were cracked near the edges, and the guy beside me spent 20 straight minutes complaining about property taxes to absolutely nobody. Real America. Outside the window, people hurried through downtown Chicago, carrying backpacks, briefcases, grocery bags, and whatever private disasters they didn't have time to process yet. Nobody out there knew who I was. Nobody cared about the courtroom. Nobody cared about Bradley Jenkins or federal fraud investigations or the fancy little collapse of the Jenkins family empire. And weirdly enough, that helped. Because after something dramatic happens, you expect your entire life to feel different overnight. Most of the time, it doesn't. You still wake up tired, still need groceries, still have laundry sitting in a chair, pretending to be furniture. The trial didn't magically heal me. That's important to say out loud. A lot of people think exposing the truth creates instant peace. Sometimes it just creates quieter pain. You finally stop carrying the lie, but now you have to carry reality instead. And reality weighs different. I think a lot of people watching this story probably understand that feeling better than they admit. Maybe you're the reliable one in your family, the one everybody calls during emergencies, the one who lends money, fixes problems, stays calm, handles logistics, keeps holidays from exploding, works overtime, answers late-night phone calls. Meanwhile, nobody really asks how you're doing unless you stop functioning. That role becomes dangerous over time, not because responsibility is bad, because some people slowly turn your reliability into permission to disrespect you. At first, it sounds harmless. You're stronger than the rest of us. You can handle it. You've always been the dependable one. Sounds flattering, right? That's how it starts. Then one day you realize everybody else gets to have emotional breakdowns while you're expected to carry refrigerators uphill with a smile on your face. And if you finally say you're exhausted, suddenly you're difficult. Funny system. I spent years believing silence meant loyalty, that if I just worked harder, stayed calmer, fixed enough disasters, eventually my family would see me clearly. That's the part that took me longest to admit. I wasn't just protecting Jenkins' industrial supply. I was protecting the fantasy that hard work automatically earns respect. It doesn't. Not always. Some people will absolutely let you sacrifice yourself forever if it makes their life easier. And they'll still call you selfish the moment you stop. That lesson hurt more than the courtroom. The courtroom was easy eventually because facts are clean. Facts don't wake up emotional. Facts don't rewrite conversations. Facts don't suddenly cry when consequences arrive. People do. I think that's why so many responsible people stay trapped inside unhealthy relationships, workplaces, and families for years. They confuse kindness with self-erasure. Those are not the same thing. Protecting someone from accountability is not love. It's maintenance. And eventually the honest person becomes emotionally bankrupt while the irresponsible person becomes more entitled. I've seen it happen everywhere now, not just inside my family. Coworkers doing entire projects while managers take credit publicly. Older sisters raising siblings while parents call them mature for their age. Husbands treating wives like emotional customer service representatives. Adult children financially supporting parents who still criticize them constantly. Different details, same pattern. One person carries the weight, everybody else adjusts to it. Then the second that person finally says, "Enough," the room acts shocked. Like boundaries are violence. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Bradley wasn't born evil. That would actually make life simpler. My brother learned very early that confidence protected him from consequences. He learned appearances mattered more than honesty because appearances worked inside our family. My mother reinforced it constantly without realizing the damage she was causing. Bradley got rewarded for looking successful. I got rewarded for being funny. Both of us adapted accordingly. That's how dysfunction spreads quietly through families for generations, not through dramatic movie villain behavior, through repeated avoidance, through favoritism, through fear of embarrassment, through people choosing comfort over truth for 20 straight years until the lies become furniture. And if you're the responsible one inside that system, eventually you start participating too. That part matters, because I could have spoken up earlier. I could have stopped covering operational disasters years before federal investigators got involved. But every time I fixed another problem silently, I told myself I was protecting the company. Really, I was protecting everybody else from discomfort, including himself. Silence feels easier short-term, very expensive long-term. I know some people watching this probably hate conflict so much they'd rather destroy their own mental health than disappoint somebody they love. I understand that instinct better than you think. But let me say something clearly. Boundaries are not cruelty. Documentation is not betrayal. And saying no to manipulation does not make you selfish. Manipulative people survive because they train good-hearted people to feel guilty for having limits. That's the whole game. And once you finally see it, you can't unsee it anymore. The strangest part is this. After the trial, I didn't feel powerful. I felt lighter, because for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying everybody else's lies in silence anymore. That kind of peace is hard to explain until you feel it yourself. So if there's one thing I hope people take from my story, it's this. If somebody only values you when you're sacrificing yourself for them, they do not love you. They love access to your labor. About 3 weeks after the trial, I started getting messages from strangers. A lot of messages. Some came through LinkedIn, some through old military contacts. A few somehow found my personal email, which honestly felt mildly terrifying. But most of them sounded almost identical. My brother did something similar. I've been covering for my boss for years. My family always blames the reliable person. I thought I was helping. That last sentence showed up constantly. I thought I was helping, so did I. That's why I want to talk about something practical now instead of emotional. Because if there's one thing I learned from everything that happened, it's this. Most disasters don't begin with explosions. They begin with undocumented patterns. Little things, verbal agreements, missing receipts. We'll fix it later. Don't worry about it. Just trust me. Those phrases should make your blood pressure rise immediately. Not because you need to become paranoid. Because memory changes the second money, reputation, or fear enters the room. I don't care if somebody is family, coworker, best friend, church member, business partner, spouse. Human beings suddenly become historians rewriting events when consequences show up. That's reality. One of the smartest habits I ever developed in logistics was simple follow-up communication. Nothing dramatic, just clarity. Per our conversation earlier, just confirming the inventory adjustment to avoid confusion moving forward. Professional. Calm, boring. Boring saves lives. People think protection looks aggressive. Usually it looks like organized email folders and timestamp screenshots. The dangerous part is emotionally manipulative people often train you to feel guilty for wanting documentation. Ever notice that? The second you ask for something in writing, suddenly you're too suspicious. Interesting, because honest people usually don't panic over paper trails. Another thing I learned the hard way: stop confusing proximity with trust. Somebody sharing your DNA does not automatically make them emotionally safe, financially responsible, or ethically mature. I know that sentence bothers people. Good. Because a lot of us were raised inside families where questioning unhealthy behavior got treated like betrayal. Meanwhile, the actual betrayal was happening constantly. That conditioning follows people straight into adulthood. You end up tolerating terrible bosses because they're under stress. You keep loaning money to irresponsible relatives because family helps family. You become everybody's emotional support system while quietly falling apart yourself because you think exhaustion equals love. It doesn't. Exhaustion usually just means nobody taught you boundaries early enough. I spent years functioning like a human emergency generator, always available, always fixing things, always calm during disasters. Sounds admirable until you realize people slowly stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as infrastructure. That happens more than people admit, especially to responsible women, especially to oldest daughters, especially to veterans, especially to anybody raised in environments where their value depended on usefulness instead of emotional presence. You adapt by becoming hypercompetent. You answer every phone call, solve every crisis, handle every emotional explosion, keep everybody stable. Then one day your nervous system starts charging interest. That's burnout. Not dramatic movie burnout either. Real burnout. Falling asleep fully dressed because you're too tired to move. Living on caffeine and resentment. Feeling anxious every time your phone buzzes. Getting irritated by tiny things because your brain never actually rests. Meanwhile, everybody around you says, "We don't know what we'd do without you." Funny how rarely that sentence comes with actual support. Here's the part I wish somebody told me years ago. You are allowed to step back before resentment turns you into somebody bitter. That matters. Because constant self-sacrifice eventually poisons your personality if you're not careful. You start becoming cynical, short-tempered, emotionally numb. Not because you're cruel, but because exhaustion changes people. And honestly, some adults become dependent on your overfunctioning. If you're constantly solving the same person's disasters over and over again, congratulations. You are not helping them. You are their unpaid emergency subscription service. That line upset one of my cousins recently, which honestly confirmed it was accurate. The other thing I want people to understand is this. Preparation is peace, not revenge, not paranoia. Peace. By the time I walked into that courtroom, I wasn't calm because I'm fearless. I was calm because I already knew the truth could survive verification. That changes your entire body. When you know your facts are organized, your memory is clear, and your integrity is intact, panic loses most of its power. Preparation removes helplessness. And integrity creates a kind of quiet confidence that arrogant people never understand until it's too late. Bradley believed performance could overpower reality: expensive suit, loud attorney, executive vocabulary, public image. But the truth is boring sometimes. It's timestamps, transfer logs, archived emails, paper trails. Reality doesn't need charisma. That's why I tell people now: protect your peace before you desperately need protection. Keep records. Pay attention to patterns. Stop ignoring your own exhaustion. Stop volunteering to become emotional life support for adults who refuse to grow up. Most importantly, stop waiting for disrespect to become catastrophic before you take it seriously. Because by the time situations explode publicly, the damage usually started years earlier in rooms where everybody chose silence because silence felt easier. Trust me, easy becomes expensive eventually. About 8 months after the trial, I found myself standing inside a small logistics office in Naperville at 6:12 in the morning, trying to figure out why somebody thought beige carpeting belonged anywhere near a coffee machine. The answer, apparently, was optimism. The office wasn't impressive. No giant glass lobby, no motivational slogans framed on walls, no assistant offering sparkling water nobody actually wants, just 6 desks, 2 printers, a whiteboard covered in freight schedules, and a coffee maker that sounded medically distressed every morning. Honestly, it was perfect. I co-owned the company with a former Army logistics officer named Denise Harper. We met overseas in 2017, arguing about fuel routing priorities during a sandstorm outside Al Asad Air Base. Strong foundation for friendship. Denise once described corporate consulting as getting paid to explain common sense to executives who ignored their warehouse staff for 15 years. Shockingly accurate business model. Most of our clients were small manufacturing companies quietly drowning in operational chaos. Missing inventory, bad routing systems, terrible communication between management and labor crews. Same movie, different cast. The weird part was how peaceful my life felt afterward. Not exciting, peaceful. That distinction matters more than people realize. For years, I thought survival itself was the goal. Just make it through another week, another crisis, another family dinner, another payroll disaster, another emotional minefield. But survival isn't actually living. It's just emergency mode stretched across years until your nervous system forgets what calm feels like. The first few months after the trial felt strange because my body kept expecting conflict that never arrived. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. already tense for no reason. Phone buzzed, instant anxiety. Unexpected email? Heart rate spike. Trauma doesn't disappear just because the courtroom ruled in your favor. Sometimes your body keeps rehearsing danger long after the danger leaves. That part surprised me. I remember sitting in my apartment one night realizing nobody had yelled at me in weeks. Nobody blamed me for anything. Nobody demanded emotional labor. Nobody called expecting rescue operations for problems they created themselves. The silence almost felt suspicious at first. That's how deeply people adapt to dysfunction. You start confusing peace with emptiness because chaos became familiar. A therapist explained that to me eventually. Yes, therapy. Turns out spending years carrying everybody else's disasters while suppressing your own emotions has side effects. Very shocking development. The therapist asked me something during our 3rd session that honestly irritated me at the time. What would your life look like if you stopped measuring your value through usefulness? I actually laughed, because I didn't even understand the question initially. That's how deep the conditioning ran. A lot of hardworking people grow up believing love must be earned continuously through sacrifice, through fixing things, through solving problems, through becoming emotionally indispensable, especially oldest daughters, especially military people, especially anybody raised in families where praise only appeared after performance. You become addicted to usefulness because usefulness feels safer than vulnerability, and eventually you start attracting people who benefit from that arrangement. That realization hit me harder than the trial did, because the courtroom exposed Bradley. Therapy exposed me, not in a cruel way, in an honest way. I had spent years volunteering to become infrastructure for people who never planned to carry their own weight. That doesn't mean I deserved what happened. But it does mean I ignored warning signs for too long because being needed made me feel valuable. A lot of people watching this probably understand exactly what I mean. How many times have you apologized just to keep peace? How many times did you stay quiet because confronting disrespect sounded exhausting? How many times did you tell yourself, it's not that bad? Meanwhile, your stress headaches got worse. Your sleep got worse. Your patience disappeared. Your entire personality slowly started shrinking around survival mode. That's not strength. That's slow emotional suffocation wearing work boots. The biggest change in my life after everything happened wasn't financial. It was environmental. Smaller circle, healthier people, clearer boundaries. That sounds boring compared to dramatic revenge stories online, but honestly, dignity usually looks boring from the outside. It looks like sleeping peacefully, paying bills on time, leaving toxic rooms earlier, choosing calmer friendships, keeping your word, learning to say no without writing an end-page apology afterward. That's real healing, not inspirational speeches, not dramatic closure conversations in the rain, just consistency. Denise told me something one afternoon while we were reorganizing a client's freight system. Most people don't actually want peace, she said. They want familiar chaos with better outcomes. That line stayed with me, because she was right. Peace feels unfamiliar when you've spent years emotionally surviving instead of living. And sometimes healing begins the moment you stop trying to recreate old relationships that only worked when you abandoned yourself inside them. I still think about my mother sometimes. Not every day anymore. Some days I feel sad for her. Some days angry. Most days just distant. Bradley took a plea agreement eventually from what I heard through attorneys. We haven't spoken since the courthouse. And honestly, that silence feels earned. Not every relationship deserves resurrection simply because history exists. That's another lesson people struggle with. Length of connection does not equal quality of connection. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stop volunteering for pain simply because it's familiar. A few weeks ago, one of our younger employees asked me how I stay calm during operational disasters. I thought about it for a second before answering. You learn pretty fast what actually matters once you stop trying to save everybody. That's the truth. Strong people are not the ones who carry everyone forever. Strong people are the ones who eventually stop volunteering to be destroyed. And if you stayed through this entire story, first of all, thank you. Seriously. Because stories like this are not really about courtrooms or revenge or fraud investigations. They're about dignity, family, boundaries, survival. And those quiet moments where people finally realize they deserve better than the life they've been tolerating. So if any part of this story reminded you of yourself, somebody you love, or somebody you lost along the way, subscribe to the channel. There are more conversations coming. And sometimes hearing the truth out loud changes people more than they expect.